Rhode Island vampires. Oh yeah, our state's got it all. A big blue bug, pyramid, a bridge that won't come down, and this. A story of the undead that scholars believe inspired some of Bram Stoker's Dracula.
We will be leaving tomorrow evening.
I'm talking about the Mercy Brown vampire incident. I first learned of this legend while researching my last video, the allegedly haunted Ramtail factory remains, also here in Rhode Island. That story claims that the ghost of a man named Peleg Walker still roams the woods of Foster with his lantern. This led me down the Rhode Island legend rabbit hole, and a vampire story was too interesting not to share. If you heard this one before, sorry, not sorry. Before we jump into exactly what happened with Mercy Brown, I have to give you some quick background on the wider New England vampire panic that happened in the late 1700s to 1800s. During this time, townsfolk believed that the dead were rising from their graves and draining the life from their family members, but in reality, it was something much more scientific. In the 19th century, tuberculosis was known as consumption, since it appeared to consume an infected person's body. It is now known to be a bacterial disease, but the cause was unknown until the late 1800s. The infection spreads easily among a family, so when one family member died of consumption, other members were usually infected and gradually lost their health. People were terrified of tuberculosis at this time, which is understandable. By the late 19th century, 70 to 90% of the urban populations of Europe and North America were infected with TB, and about 80% of those individuals who developed active TB died of it. Symptoms would include feelings of sickness or weakness, weight loss, fever, coughing, chest pain, and severe respiratory failure. It wasn't always a quick decline though. Infections could take years before symptoms showed and the person died. People at this time wanted two things, an explanation and a solution. Their explanation was simple. People believed that consumption spread due to the deceased person draining the life from other family members. The vampire would rise from the grave at night, visit the family under the cover of darkness, and sap their life away. So, what was the solution for the vampires? Let's go to the case of Mercy Brown to find out. In 1882, the Brown family in Exeter, Rhode Island contracted tuberculosis or consumption, and the effects were devastating. George and Mary had 7 children: Mary Olive, Edwin, Annie Laura, Mercy Lena, Hattie Mabel, Jenny Adeline, and Myra Frances. In 1883, Mary was the first to pass away. In 1884, daughter Mary Olive died from the disease. Several years passed until 1889 when Edwin began to show signs of the dreadful condition. Then in 1892, daughter Mercy Lena Brown declined rapidly and died on January 17th. After losing 3 members of his family and his only son fading, George Brown was desperate for a solution. At this point, the small town of Exeter was riled up in superstition. Combine this with fear and desperation, and the answer to stopping the illness and death was to exhume the alleged vampire and conduct various rituals. The scared citizens of Exeter, fearing for their own health, begged George to dig up the women's bodies, figure out which one was to blame, and rid Edwin of the evil spirit stealing his life. On March 17, 1892, in the small graveyard behind the town's Baptist church, they exhumed the bodies of Mary Brown and Mary Olive Brown. They opened the caskets and, as would be expected, found only their bones inside. The townspeople then turned their attention to the casket of Mercy Brown, who had died 8 weeks earlier. Reports say she was kept in this above-ground crypt awaiting burial until the ground thawed. When the lid was taken off her coffin, her face appeared flush, and there was blood in her heart and in her veins, which the townspeople took as proof she was feeding on the living. An article from the Providence Journal dated March 19, 1892 recounts exactly what happened, noting that they were testing a horrible superstition in the town of Exeter. The article covers the loss of George's wife and 2 children, then goes on to say, during the few weeks past, Mr. Brown has been besieged on all sides by a number of people who expressed implicit faith in the theory that the dead were rising from the grave to feed upon the living. It goes on to say that George Brown and local doctors did not believe in the vampire theory and only exhumed the bodies after immense pressure from the community. Finally, the article states that the body of Mercy Lena Brown was in a state of natural decomposition with nothing exceptional existing. But this lack of decomposition of Mercy's body was perfectly consistent with the fact that she had been dead for less than 2 months and kept in basically a freezer. The townspeople were not having it, and as part of a superstitious ritual, cut out Mercy's heart and lungs, burned them to ashes, then mixed this with water to give to Edwin as a cure to the vampire's curse. Edwin consumed the concoction, but the tuberculosis continued to consume him, and he died 2 months later on May 2nd, 1892. Sadly, George would lose 3 more of his daughters to tuberculosis, Jenny and Annie in 1895, and Myra in 1899. Hattie, the Browns' 5th child, would be the only child to live into the 20th century. The focus of this story is always on Mercy Lena Brown, but it was the actions of a grief-stricken father that led to this legend being born. It's a tragedy that this happened to thousands of families at this time, and it's easy to reduce this one down to a Halloween vampire story. Even today, Mercy's grave is decorated with flowers and pennies, and is even anchored to the ground because of repeated thefts of the stone. Reports show that there were 18 documented instances of the exhumation of family members in suspected vampire cases throughout New England in the 18th and 19th century. But the case of Mercy Brown would be the last. This is more than just a vampire story that you tell on Halloween. It's a story of loss, grief, and doing whatever necessary to try and save loved ones. So, if you do visit the Brown family plot, give the whole family some love. To see more interesting Rhode Island icons like this and learn about their history, you can check out the rest of my videos on my channel right now. Thank you very much for watching.